Well, I want to welcome you to the Plan II Thesis presentations in the Barbara Jordan room. My name is Alan Sager. I've been a lecturer here in government for 31 years. I first got here in '69 as an assistant professor. After 5 years, I went to work for the Chief Justice of the United States and came back and didn't get back to teaching till 31 years ago. I'm pleased and honored to be able to be the moderator here, and just to be a forthright, Rylan Maksoud was one of my great students. I had him in a number of courses, so I don't want to be, if you feel I'm a little biased toward him, that is the reason. So,
this professor, I'm also biased as well. So that's
good. Well, I hope it's for me. So the order I'm going to use is the order that is on the program. What you'll have is 6 to 8 minutes. Then we'll take questions. If you divide 80 by 6, you get about 13. So the total time you'll have is about 13 minutes or 12 minutes. They want me to end this by 5:20. So let's begin. First of all, I'm just tell you, I'm very impressed by the topics. I have a law degree, a PhD, and a chemical engineering degree, and I probably could not begin to even research some of your topics. So the first one will be Spencer Buckner. Professor John Savage is his thesis advisor. Protecting Texas, Protest, Profit, and Pandemic at the University of Texas at Austin, something we may all be very interested in. Mr. Buckner, please begin.
All right, can everybody see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes, yep. I can hear you, so I presume everyone else can.
Great. I'll go ahead and get started then. All right. I'm Spencer Buckner. My thesis is Protecting Texas, Protest, Profit, and Pandemic at the University of Texas at Austin. Before I begin, I want to thank my supervisor, John Savage, and second reader, Diana Dawson, both from the School of Journalism, for all your help this year and for putting up with me as well. I know it's likely not easy. My thesis is a chronological retelling of COVID-19 at UT Austin, specifically how the university and how the student body reacted to the pandemic. I'm not going to go over the entire timeline in this presentation. We all lived through it. But I will talk about the methodology I used, the two actors I looked at, the university and the student body, and the critique that I used as well. So why exactly did I choose this topic? There's not a lot of documentation of what happens on university campuses or local places anymore. The Daily Texan, which I worked at for 3 years, is the only paper with committed, dedicated coverage of the University of Texas at Austin, which means that there's not a lot of documentation of what happens here. And for something like COVID-19, I thought there needed to be some documentation of this and specifically how the university reacted to it. So I figured I would do it myself. Like I said, I worked at the Daily Texan, the campus newspaper, for 3 years. Much of that time I was on the editorial board and spent a lot of time talking to administrators, student organizers, student government, and researching and learning about the university. And we would often ask, what is the university doing? How is it impacting students? And why is the university doing this? And the why was the hardest to answer. And over the course of the past year, I found myself asking why quite a bit. Why did UT reopen campus amid the worst pandemic in a century? Why did UT ask for donations to fund its student emergency fund, which provided struggling students money to pay for rent, food, and utilities, despite having a $30 billion endowment? Why did UT rely almost exclusively on a volunteer-based testing regime for COVID-19, with an estimated 22,000 students living on and near campus in the fall semester? Why did UT use dubious claims of legality to avoid disclosing the location of COVID-19 clusters among students in West Campus? Why did UT host football games with 15,000 people in attendance during the pandemic? Despite all of these decisions being pretty clearly against the interests of community health and safety. I found that the most explanatory framework to answer these questions in, which I use in my thesis, is looking at UT as a neoliberal institution. Neoliberalism has been the dominant form of global capitalism for the past half century. It's most commonly associated with figures like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. And neoliberalism, in very simple sense, is the idea that the free market is the most effective and rational way to organize human activity. Whether it's goods and commodities, healthcare, housing, or education, neoliberal theory says that the free market is the best way to do this. So under a neoliberal regime, goods are privatized and wealth and business deregulated to free the market as much as possible. Today, both political parties in the United States are neoliberal parties and enact neoliberal policy. So what does this look like for UT Austin? Since the 1980s, the university has been defunded by the state of Texas. Universities used to be considered a public good that all should have access to. Now they're private goods. And because UT is now forced to operate on the free market, its structure looks very much like that of a business. The university is led by a largely non-academic bureaucracy, which makes decisions often based on the profit motive, as opposed to academic necessity or student need. And education itself has become a commodity. Many people take polls of students of why they go to college, and over the past 40 years, it's changed from to get an education to get a job. So that's the university as it exists today. And so with that in mind, I wanted to ask, how have students responded to this? And I did that by looking at student organizing and student activism.
Oh, you've got 2 more minutes.
Okay. In 2019 and 2020, UT saw the most successful and largest student movement in probably the past decade or so, in the Coalition Against Sexual Misconduct, which basically staged multiple protests on campus asking UT why we don't know the names of professors found guilty of or found in violation of sexual misconduct policy, why they're not fired, why they're still teaching, and why UT has woefully inadequate systems to deal with this. This movement grew beyond that scope once reforms were made by the university, and was looking quite powerful right up until the pandemic hit. So part of the thesis is trying to understand how student organizing, and particularly this movement, responded and reacted to the pandemic. I also look at underpaid in UT, which deals with graduate student issues. Graduate students at UT are paid on average $15,700 a year, which is less than half of the cost of living in Austin. So they organize for higher wages. Both these groups very active during the pandemic. So how did the students respond? By and large, one of the biggest features was developing parallel structures for mutual aid. During the first few weeks of the pandemic and during other events like the ice storm, these mutual aid networks raised tens of thousands of dollars to help students survive.
We have to call time in about 30 seconds.
Okay. And so students basically had to develop these parallel infrastructures for their own survival. Digital organization and protest also took place of physical protest, just given the health necessities of the pandemic. It had mixed results. Petition campaigns and email campaigns aren't necessarily as disruptive as sit-ins and other physical occupations. So despite having petitions with the support of a quarter of the student body, student demands weren't necessarily heard in that type of university. And those were demands for things like equitable grading systems, hazard pay for graduate student workers, things of that nature. Certainly much more than I just described. And all that leads to the question of what happens next. Will the student movement be able to come back after the pandemic? And
Okay, time. I'd have to stop right here.
Gotcha.
Okay, now I'm supposed to go to the chat. Are there any questions on the chat? Let's see. From John Savage, how much pushback did you get from UT during your reporting?
At the Daily Texan, quite a bit. Being on the editorial board, we certainly weren't super friendly to the university. And so, yeah, it's also difficult because the way it's organized now, the university controls the flow of information to students. So if you're a student reporter, the university can simply stop giving you information and you can no longer write stories. So university pushback is not only is often very directly affecting how you conduct journalism. Yeah, and I mean, during the course of the thesis, you know, it's pretty much, there's only so much you can expect the university to tell you if you are asking them something in an interview. So they can just refuse to say anything.
Now, so I have my question is, how does the way UT handle it compare to other similarly situated universities? And what is the evidence that the way it was handled led to more or less cases, more or less deaths on a comparative basis?
Yeah. So other universities, especially large public schools like UT, handled it in a pretty similar way. Just given that universities are pretty much running very similarly nowadays in terms of how they operate. Kind of looking back to the neoliberalism thing. UT, I mean, football was held everywhere, like for all schools that had football programs for the most part. I mean, it's hard to really compare rates of outbreaks and stuff like that on campuses. UT's testing program, it's hard to say how accurate it was, given that it was opt-in. Other schools did mandatory testing for students in dormitories or just for students that were attending classes. So they have a more accurate picture than we do. Other schools that went online, I'm sure they had less cases. And some schools did go online during the fall semester. UNC Chapel Hill did within 3 weeks of going back on campus, and they went online once they reached a lower case count than UT did when we were 3 weeks into our fall semester. So it's really hard to say. And some universities wouldn't even make their case data public. So, I mean, it's just a matter of the university being able to control the flow of information and just having to make do with what information we have.
Would it be worth at least comparing, say, Madison, Austin, Columbus, which are major cities in states that have major universities, as a, I can't think of the word, but as a substitute for actually getting to the university, assuming that whatever happens at the university is partly reflective of Madison, whatever happens here is partly reflective of Austin, whatever happens in Austin. And you can go on to a few more where the university is the center of the city, although Austin has now surpassed Madison and Columbus in many ways. That is, is there any way to get a comparison to see about your assumptions of what could have happened? And I don't know, we haven't gotten to that point, so it is the null case of if they did nothing, what would happen? If they did everything, what would happen? What did they do that happened? That's all. This is for your thesis advisor, not for me. That would be a question I would ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth looking at, and a lot of schools saw similar spikes of cases that UT saw. The way that the semester went was about comparable with other schools, just given different scales and things like that. But
excuse me, by the semester, you're talking about the fall semester now.
Yes, and the spring semester as well.
Oh yeah, we were out in the last half, right? Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. But I mean, just given the different nature of the cities that the universities are located in, and then state policy and city policy differing for each particular location, it's just there's so many different variables to control for. I mean, just being at UT and doing the reporting on UT that I did for the past 3 years, I was like, I'm going to focus on this one as one example. Obviously trying not to generalize whatever I'm finding for other universities, but noticing and noting when trends did exist between
okay, great. Although there are two other questions, and unfortunately we're at 14 minutes. We can give you another minute or two. I'm sorry. Okay, so Ashley asks, what would you have recommended that UT did instead? And someone else asked, which is probably also the same question, what are your conclusions? Unfortunately, you only have about 2 minutes to do that, but
okay.
And I know this is so well done that you've got a lot more to say. I appreciate that.
I mean, things that UT could have done instead. Staying completely online would have obviously been the most safe choice throughout the entire pandemic. It would have been difficult for the university, and the reason that I can imagine they didn't is because of the necessity to continue to make money as an institution, which is put upon them by the economic structure. But all things considered, the university should have been online. There should have been a much stronger testing regime if we did go in person. UT could have done mandatory testing, and they did for very small groups of people. If they would have done that, we would have had a very good idea of where the virus was and where outbreaks were. As far as if UT had to stay in person, just given the pressures, it seems like, yeah, a better testing regime, not having football games, like actually a lot of universities would suspend chapters of Greek life that held parties that were clearly violating social distancing guidelines. UT did no such thing. They could have shut off the water to these houses, which I think Boulder did. Things like that. I mean, it's just taking a more hands-on, health-centered approach as opposed to a hands-off, abdicating responsibility kind of approach.
All right, let me ask you this question, just the last little quick question, but you don't have to answer. You can put it in your. Would you have recommended? I taught in person. Would you have recommended that that everyone take their temperature going into each building?
I would have been a better idea than not. I had a class that was in person in the fall, and the spacing, it was a 30-person class in a 300-person room, which I felt safe in, but I mean, more precautions, taking temperature and stuff like that, and requiring people that were taking in-person classes to get tested every 2 weeks, I think would have been smart as well, since there's just a lot more that could have.
Okay, so there are a lot more things. Well, thank you very much. This is wonderful, and I think it'll be helpful when you finish it to a lot more people than just your thesis committee and yourself. So great topic and very well presented. Thank you so much. We'll now move into our next, Ashley Deutser with Professor Marissa Epstein, Lady Bird, Texas Sangria, creating a better for you sangria brand. Fascinating.
Okay, can everyone see the screen okay? Yes, okay, I'm guessing then yes. So so I'm Ashley Deutser. My thesis is creating a prepackaged clean sangria. And I'm really thankful for Plan II, as well as my thesis advisors, Drew Hayes and Marissa Epstein, for supporting me in this project. And so this idea had an origin a couple years back. One day I remembered thinking like, wow, I really want a glass of cold sangria. It was one of those ideas that you think of, you never really do anything about, keep in your back pocket, until I was talking to Marissa one day and suggesting research papers in the food and beverage space. And she was like, what if you developed your own product instead, and asked me what I want to develop. I kind of panicked and said sangria, and she ended up loving the idea. So here we are today, and I'm really excited to walk you through the process that I took in working on this project.
Good, all right.
So the first thing I did was took a really deep dive into the market trends to see if they supported a sangria. And I found 3 major trends that stood out. So the first is that big beer, like your Budweiser, Coors, are seeing their sales decline. And millennials in particular are really big fans of wine. This isn't your grandpa's Bordeaux. These are like new formats and new types of wine, like canned wines, which you can see are rapidly going crazy in the last decade. And so finally, ready to drink prepackaged cocktails like the canned ranch waters you see everywhere have just exploded in the last couple of years. So I looked at all of this and thought, people don't want to drink beer. They like wine and prepackaged cocktails. Why wouldn't a wine-based cocktail work? I was feeling really good about like where I was with the project and my assumptions, but I really wanted to make sure that actual customers agreed with me. So I looked up from my research and started calling people. This is the peak of COVID back in March. So I called a lot of people on the phone. And they were really happy to talk about anything other than COVID. So I interviewed them about their drinking habits and found basically that they matched what I was seeing. And I was particularly surprised about the enthusiasm people had around sangria. They really, really liked it, but they had a hard time finding a good one and said over and over again that ones that they usually found tasted like cough syrup and were way too sweet. So with this, I kind of knew what I wanted to go into the product formulation process with, but unfortunately I'm a terrible chef and an even worse mixologist. So I knew I would need a little help developing the recipe. So I decided to crowdsource the recipe, also because I knew so many people were bored and drinking a lot last March. So I sent out a recipe, got a lot of good information, still needed some help. So I phoned some friends who were big avid home brewers, and we set up this kind of mad scientist setup, figured out how to carbonate sangria, threw it in a keg. I became really good friends with the people at the Austin homebrew store. But we really just like figured it out. And with every test batch we did, I would take it to customers, get customer feedback, have them fill out surveys. So I really knew what people were thinking until we settled on one that people really, really liked. And as we were going through the whole process, we were listening over and over again to Viva Terlingua by Jerry Jeff Walker. And one of the songs on the album is Sangria Wine. The song after Sangria Wine is called Little Bird. And so Little Bird and Sangria became inextricably linked in my mind. And then I drew up a little bird on a Post-it note, made these fun stickers so that I wasn't dropping off like label-less bottles at people's houses. And it was really fun. So I spent a lot of time over the summer tweaking the recipe, dropping it off. And it was honestly really great because I was giving people something to celebrate around and something really fun during a time that was not very fun and people didn't have a lot of reasons to celebrate. Something else I learned in the process was that sangria is a really big Thanksgiving and Christmas drink. So that was also really fun, giving people an opportunity to drink that over the holidays and just have another thing to increase their celebrations. And so now I am doing test batches in cans. I'm working with a couple local companies who are graciously letting me slide my keg into their canning lines. And I switched from glass to cans right now because glass is really heavy and breaks really easily. And so to do this at scale, I would need cans just in terms of finding co-packers and being able to transport and sell this at an affordable cost. And so what I made was craft sangria that actually tastes good. And I'm really proud of what it is, the sugar content, the calories. It was kind of like, I just kind of figured it out along the way. And I was really proud of myself because I called a lot of commercial formulation companies that charge tens of thousands of dollars to make this. And like, I figured out how to do it with a lot of help, but that I still figured out how to do it without these like so-called professionals. So I learned a lot throughout the process other than just how to get wine stains out of my shirts. I learned first the importance of products that solve a problem. So you've probably seen that there are hundreds of different seltzers out on the market. Like I saw a new Austin-based seltzer come out yesterday. And it just really interested me because I realized that like all of these products don't really solve problems. So I really wanted to create a product that solved a problem and solved a problem for people that I knew and like knew what they were thinking. So I just made sure to talk to people and really understand like what product I was making and what problem it solved. I also learned that I can figure out a lot more than I think I can. But I also learned that it's really beneficial to ask for help in areas that like I know that there are people who just know it better. With that, I'm really thankful for the generosity of everyone in the Austin CPG industry that's helped me through this project, particularly the guys at Ranch Rider and Rambler Sparkling Water have so helpful to me, just letting me like basically stalk them during the day, like go to their production facilities, teach me everything. It's been really, really helpful. And I also learned the power of just going for it. I feel like I'm a person that really has to have everything in a line. Like I need to know all of the answers before I start something. And with this, I learned like, you kind of got to just go for it. So that's something that I think I'll take with this in the future. And so this project is one that I'm going to keep working on after graduation. I have a really great team of advisors working on it with me. So hopefully in the near future, you'll be able to go to the store and buy a little bird. Stay tuned for that. And if you want to stay up to date, please go to our Instagram, follow us. I post a lot of updates, a lot of behind the scenes of kegs exploding sometimes when we mess up, and just some fun updates. And we need a lot of people to sample it. So I would love for all of you to sample. And we also have a newsletter on our website. But yeah, that's it. And cheers.
Fascinating that this is a Plan II thesis.
Yes.
I'll tell you the question I won't ask. You don't need to answer. Do you need any help raising money? Okay, let's go on. And are you going to split the profits with your thesis advisor?
That is something we're going to figure out in the future.
Okay. Brilliant. I happen to be in business myself. So I have 300 employees in franchise programs. So yes, this is brilliant. So what would you tell future Plan II students about doing a thesis like this? How
I would
how did you find something, a product? I know you said the product was look for a need that needs to be filled. What are there other areas where they can look to if they're not interested in alcohol?
Oh yeah, so I'm not really interested in alcohol, like besides this. I'm really more interested in the better for you food space. So I always really wanted to do something in that space. And I would say like within that, I would just start with a problem that you needed to solve. For me, sangria was also a problem. Like I don't drink beer. I really don't like the taste of like seltzers, White Claws. So that was my problem to solve. And I'm really thankful that I had Marissa's curriculum for her MBA nutrition entrepreneurship course that kind of guided me throughout the process. So that was really helpful. But I would totally recommend doing creative thesis. It challenged me in ways that I never expected, and I learned a lot. And I also just liked to be a little bit more hands-on than just writing a paper.
Well, I think you probably created a space for future thesis students, honors thesis students who may be interested in a better medical thing or a better home thing or whatever. I have a question from Michelle Maksoud. How much did it cost you so far and how did you get it funded?
So it really hasn't cost me a lot at all so far. The homebrew equipment, luckily my friends already owned, so I got to borrow that from them. The only thing I've been buying is wine, fresh fruit, and some like fruit juices and fruit concentrates right now. So it really hasn't cost me anything. And a lot of friends who I've been giving to like will pay for ingredients. So I've been breaking even and haven't put money into it. So a lot of money into it so far, but I will be funding it in the future. And so I'll be raising a friends and family round, but that's kind of in the next year going to happen.
Okay. Many of the comments are about, I'm waiting my bottle. It's really great. A good job, which we all think. When you called people for opinions, how did you make sure you had a representative sample, or did that not matter?
Yeah, that really did matter to me. It was a little interesting because I had originally planned to go to grocery stores, bars, restaurants. Like I wanted to meet people where they were drinking. But I started doing this project last March in like peak COVID, where you couldn't even go to the grocery store without like fear of everything. So I had to get super creative. So I started out by like asking my friends for 5 of their friends. And I tried to I talked to my older cousins, people I knew from work, from school, from like people that worked with my dad. Like I tried to get a representative sample and also a range of ages. So I got like from 21 to 60 or 70. And it definitely was a process. Like I started with like the niche of people who I thought it would be at the beginning. And then that adapted to like, oh, I realized it was a little bit of older demographic. So then I interviewed more people. It was like an evolving process, but I'm still talking to people. That process never stopped, the customer research process.
Here's another question. Where do you hope to see Little Bird 1 year from now?
That's a really good question. 1 year from now. So I guess today is the first Austin FC game. So I guess next year I would love to be able to go to a bar or just to a restaurant and be able to like see people drinking a Little Bird, and being able to sell it legally a year from now would be very exciting to me. And I think that we're going to be there. So.
Okay, what is your dream place to sell Little Bird?
My dream place to sell Little Bird. My dream place to sell Little Bird is Stubbs, the concert venue. That's where I initially had the first idea for it, and I would love to be able to see an awesome concert and drink a Little Bird at the same time.
John Savage has this question, then I have a question. How many canned sangritas are already in the market?
So there are a couple canned sangrias on the market. I would say there's like probably less than 10 or 20. The thing that differentiates them from Little Bird is that they're all very, very high in sugar and also do not have clean ingredients at all. My sangria is only made with wine and fruit. It doesn't have any natural flavors, no artificial flavorings. It's just pure ingredients. And it's also not sweet at all. It only has it has no grams of added sugar and only 4.5 grams of naturally occurring sugar from the fruit. But those sangrias average around 20 to 30 grams of sugar that are all added sugars in 8-ounce cans.
Very, very good. My question is, does it matter the quality? Have you tested out different qualities of wine?
Yes. So that is also kind of where it started, because we used to make sangria with very bad wine, because that's kind of what people do with sangria, because it doesn't really matter what the wine quality is. So it gives us a lot of flexibility into what kind of wine we're using, but we're not using we're still using decent wine. We're not using the worst wine ever, but it's the juice definitely masks a lot of imperfections in the wine.
Aha, okay. So you become actually an experimental scientist.
Yes. I feel like I've been working in a mad science lab for the past year and a half-ish.
Or practical science lab.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Let's see, any other question? No other questions? I'm running too efficiently here. I actually have 2 more minutes. I could have given Spencer another minute and a half. Anything else you'd like to say, or anybody else would like to ask? Because based on my sense here, we have about 3 more minutes.
Oh, Rachel asked where she can buy it.
Oh, good. I see that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't legally sell it right now because I don't produce it commercially, but we will be producing it commercially soon. Stay tuned on our Instagram or newsletter, and I'll have a lot more updates on that. But before we sell it, I will be doing a lot of samplings, especially this summer. So there will be a lot of opportunities to try Little Bird around Austin, and this coming very soon.
So when you do samplings, how do you decide the sampling audience?
That's been a little challenging because of COVID. I sampled my first couple of batches with the same people who I had interviewed over the phone, just because I couldn't really drop random liquids off to people I didn't know, last year, the peak of COVID. So everyone I knew, they were friends of friends. But I, right now, we've had a ton of people who I don't know have it, which has been really fun to see, especially over Christmas. I did those fun Christmas bottles and people gave them out as presents. So most of the people who bought it for their friends. So a lot of people have tried it, and I had a link, so I got feedback on all of those bottles too. So it was a little random. It wasn't exactly as scientific as I wanted it, but as I wanted it to be, especially with the samples. But that's why we're doing more sampling this summer as everything starts to open up, and I'll really nail down the consumer behavior around it and where exactly we'd want to sell it.
What would you do if you found out it was so good, many people were getting drunk on it?
So it's a little bit hard to get drunk on it. It's 5% alcohol for 12 ounces. So it's about the same as a beer. So I guess if you drank a couple of them, you'd get really drunk, but it's very intentionally a lower alcohol beverage that you'll be able to kind of drink over the course of a day, or very easy drinking situation. But it's categorized as a low alcohol option.
But if it was happening, would you do anything? Let's say all of a sudden this becomes a big hit, and what you find out is there's a lot more drunk kids on campus now. As a manufacturer, would you do anything about it?
I mean, I don't know. I would not sell it to people who are not 21 because that's extremely illegal. So if it got in the hands of people who weren't 21, that would be I don't really know. That would be from a retailer's liability, I think. I'm not exactly sure. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope people it's not really a drink meant to get you drunk. It's a drink more meant to enjoy with celebrations, enjoy over a really good dinner with friends, at a concert on the lake. So not sure about that, but we'll
Okay.
cross that bridge if it happens.
One last question. Oh, well, I'm going to ask one more question. I have a problem sometimes with cans because cans are made of aluminum. Aluminum in the ecosystem can lead to Alzheimer's. The research, and I'm pretty old, but I don't have it yet. You said you preferred cans to bottles because bottles break. How many have you had a series of decisions you made with regard to your impact on the environment?
So that's something that I'll be studying this summer. It's really important to me that this is not doing more harm than it is good. Sustainability is also very important to me. So that's something we'll be deciding on this summer. With glass, my initial calculation showed a much bigger environmental impact just because it's so heavy to transport. So we'd need 4 times the amount of trucks to transport the same amount in cans. Also just the recyclability of aluminum, and there's a couple different formats of cans. There's BPA free aluminum. There's a lot of different options. So these are ones we're exploring into the future, but haven't totally nailed that down just because we're not exactly sure what our manufacturer will be yet.
Okay, but by the way, that's a very astute environment about the cost of transportation. That's the difference between oranges and orange juice, by the way.
Mhm.
Okay, the last question quickly is, how many different fruit ingredients are there in Little Bird?
There are 4 different, so we have 2 flavors of classic red and a white peach. The classic red has 4 different fruits in it, and the white peach has 3 different fruits.
Organic?
Yes, I use organic fruits. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much. Another just brilliant set of thoughts and execution. I'm very impressed as seniors at UT. It's really good for the school. People knew the kinds of things you all are doing. It's unbelievable. So thank you. Next is Rylan Maksoud. We'll be talking about fines as a issue, the burden of fine-only offenses in Texas.
Yes.
Rylan has already been admitted to UC Law School and probably be teaching them a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess I'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin, we have to define some terms. Class C misdemeanors are all criminal offenses in Texas that are punishable by a fine up to $500. Offenders are usually given a citation, otherwise known as a ticket or a non-custodial arrest. However, for any offense other than speeding, texting, or having an open container, the police may make a custodial arrest and book you in jail at their discretion, despite having to release you after paperwork and you promising to come back. The Supreme Court ruled in 5-4 in 2001 that jailing a Travis County mother for not wearing her seatbelt while taking her small children home from soccer practice was constitutional. The most common Class C misdemeanors are something you may be personally familiar with: traffic tickets. Driving too fast, driving too slow, driving the left lane without passing, and so on. There are over 200 moving violations in Texas. This list on the left doesn't include non-moving violations, seatbelts, expired registration, and more. And while traffic offenses may get the most attention and may seem trivial to some, Class C misdemeanors include a host of other crimes. They include minor possession of alcohol, offensive physical contact, assault by threat, theft under $100, unreasonable noise, possession of drug paraphernalia, and even voyeurism, keeping toms. And until 2019, even groping was a fine-only offense. Needless to say, a conviction for some of these on one's record carries much harsher consequences. All Class C crimes, traffic and non-traffic, are adjudicated in one of 2 courts: justice court or municipal court. Unlike regular courts, there is no court reporter keeping record of proceedings. Each of Texas's 254 counties has up to 8 elected justices of the peace that preside over their own justice courts. The only qualification for being elected justice of the peace is to be a registered voter, virtually anyone over 18. New non-attorney justices of the peace are only required to take 80 hours of training within a year after being sworn in, not before. For municipal judges, it's just 32 hours of training, as shown in this actual trifold brochure on the right that's given to new judges. For context, law school is 3 years full-time, and your acupuncturist is required to complete 1,800 hours of training before starting work, not 80 or 32. Larger cities have municipal courts of record that city police typically use. Those at least require judges to be licensed attorneys. In exchange for that and a court reporter, your right to appeal is virtually taken away. And for those of you with no fear of the criminal justice system, don't think you can avoid these judges. They do everything from issue search, arrest, and mental health detention warrants to even determine causes of death with no medical training. Justices of the peace also handle evictions and civil claims under $20,000, otherwise known as small claims court. Anyone can file a lawsuit and drag you into justice court, which I've done, which brings me to my next slide. This project centered around 3 categories: primary, secondary, and direct. As shown in the middle, I closely read primary sources like the Code of Criminal Procedure, course statistics, and training materials. And of course, I made thorough use of the available secondary sources like scholarly journals and reports. I supplemented the available literature with new direct observations through personal experience. When I turned 18, I was able to file a lawsuit against an apartment building that scammed me and 50 other students, as you can see on the left. Seeing that through to completion gave me a foundation in the civil side of justice courts. To ensure I had experience on the criminal side as well, I defended myself against a speeding ticket, availing myself of all criminal defendant rights, ending up in 3 different courts and letting a jury decide my fate. As mentioned earlier, there are hundreds of traffic offenses. It is impossible to drive without creating at least a reasonable suspicion that you've created a crime, the Fourth Amendment requirement to be detained. Note that reasonable suspicion is a lower bar than probable cause, and certainly much lower than beyond reasonable doubt. The Supreme Court unanimously upheld officers using these reasonable suspicion traffic stops. Sandra Bland near Houston in 2015 following a pretextual stop made international. Twice, I personally experienced being pulled over by DUI officers for made-up traffic offenses that they did not ticket, who were merely fishing downtown Austin at night for those under the influence. After the second time, I filed a complaint and included incontrovertible proof from my vehicle's dash cam that I intentionally violated no traffic laws. The officers were exonerated for any policy. For many of you, though, the court procedures may seem unimportant. You can afford any ticket and you would never go against an officer's word. That's certainly fair enough, nothing wrong with that. But what about that one neighbor we all have, leading a miserable life, causing trouble for everyone? Whether your grass is above city code, you sometimes roll your street stop sign, or it just makes up that you threatened him, which happened to someone I know. Anyone can single-handedly charge you with any Class C misdemeanor. Other jurisdictions try to rely on obscurity and hope nobody knows how to draft a complaint and file it, or they try to trick complainants into making an application to the prosecutor for permission. Austin, however, makes it very easy to do with quick online forms. So maybe be a little nicer to your neighbors, especially your attorney friends. And it's crucial to stress that if you do find yourself the victim of a false allegation, there are no court-appointed attorneys in justice or municipal court. While the fine may be only a couple $100s, an attorney would be at least $1,000. Unless you were otherwise going to plead guilty or truly had no other option, representing oneself in any criminal proceeding is just about the worst decision one can make. You certainly don't want a theft, assault, or voyeurism conviction on your. Simply failing to show up for court, though, is an even worse decision, even though many can't come during working hours or just know they won't be able to pay. Failing to appear results in being sent to collections, being charged with a new failure to appear Class C, and a warrant for your arrest. You'll be required to put up enough bail to cover both offenses to leave jail. But since 2017, if you languish for 48 hours without being able to pay, you'll usually be allowed to leave. As shown on the right, prior to 2017, those who couldn't afford bail simply stayed in jail at the discretion of the judge. And of course, your license and vehicle registration will be barred from renewal. If you're guilty and can't pay, the first option is a more expensive payment plan or completing 16 hours of court community service for a $200 citation. The judge also has limited discretion to waive costs and fines. However, ultimately, if you do not have enough hours in the week for community service and you do not have enough to pay, you will be jailed at a rate of at least $100 for 24 hours in jail until your debts are paid. Additionally, the court will deny renewal of your driver's license, and driving to work on a suspended license is as serious as a DUI. Reforms were passed in 2017 and 2019 to mandate judges to merely conduct an inability to pay hearing, but they still retain discretion. For justice and municipal courts from September 2019 through February 2020, over 1 million Class C arrest warrants were issued. Compared to the same period from 2016 to 2017, just 22,000 fewer arrest warrants were issued, 35,000 less were jailed, and 7,000 more completed community service. I would not call this great progress, but certainly better than getting worse. And although I certainly have lots of ideas on how to improve the system, that's what we call a political question. These fines and fees were imposed in a bipartisan fashion and will remain as a regressive tax to fill budget holes, unless the legislature finds another politically palatable way to replace the $15 in collections per Texas resident. However, it's been shown that Democratic governors who win by thin margins incarcerate more than Republicans who narrowly win, so I would not necessarily expect further reforms should the Texas legislature shift to Democratic control soon. The Sandra Bland Act in 2017, which altered jail procedure, also required more detailed traffic stop statistics. Stronger provisions supported by the Bland family, including a ban on Class C custodial arrests, failed under police opposition. But at least now we know that in 2019, 64,000 of the 307,000 arrests of Texas traffic stops were for misdemeanors punishable by a fine only, most likely the initial traffic offense. Now with that, I'm ready for everyone's questions.
Well, you finished that very quickly. Let's see what we have here. Chat. I don't, ooh, there's my, that doesn't look like anyone's ready to ask you a question. The first question I would ask is, what's the alternative?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. My first recommendation would be, I have a number of recommendations, but my first one would be to increase training for judges and clerks without changing the system. Many clerks that I encountered didn't know what things were, like an order of dismissal or what even a pretrial hearing was. One of them sent me a letter with the wrong date to show up, which almost resulted in a warrant for my arrest. The court coordinator for the appeals court also somehow didn't even know that one's entitled to a jury trial and tried to ignore my demand for one, even though I don't even have to demand. By default, you get a jury trial. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty concerning because even though they're not allowed to give legal advice, they're the only source for legal information for everyone coming to this court because they're not allowed to have an attorney. And judges as well for training. All my motions were ignored, never ruled on. Motions to quash the complaint, motion to compel discovery, motion for pretrial hearing. But it didn't seem though out of malice or prejudice. It just seemed more like just everyone involved, every step of the way, just had a complete, genuine unfamiliarity with making sure to respect, all the rights that a criminal defendant has, which are many, thankfully. And in a court without attorneys, it's just very troubling that the people sending everyone to jail, I've never had any kind of legal education. Additionally, I'd recommend court-appointed attorneys for everyone. Certainly, I don't think that it should be allowed to jail people and subject people to criminal consequences without an attorney. But of course, all these require funding problems, additional funding. One thing that would not require additional funding is to stop requiring people to show up to court for what they call pretrial hearing. What they call is just a meeting with the prosecutor with no judge present, where they force you to try to make a plea deal with the prosecutor. Even though legally, you're not allowed to be compelled to attend these. If you don't attend these, the court will treat it as, many courts usually will treat it as a regular failure to appear and will not set your case for a trial, even though that's what they're supposed to do. And in terms of changing the whole system, we can move to a system with civil infractions, where it's not a criminal offense to speed, at least for traffic offenses. I know there are some other more serious offenses considered in these courts, like red light cameras or UT parking tickets. You can't go to jail because they're a civil offense. They're a civil matter. But if we still want to keep the criminal nature, make people scared of committing crimes, in places that follow the Nordic model, they have what are called day fines. Their fines are personalized as a fraction, usually half of one's daily income. That's $27, for someone making $20,000 a year, or $2,700 for someone making $2 million a year. That would, change it to be more of a progressive taxation system to fund these courts, rather than the regressive tax that it is now. So hopefully, one of these will certainly take fruition, or at least ban arrests, for Class C custodial, for Class C misdemeanors, if you're not allowed to go to jail, supposedly for them anyway.
You use the word regressive. What do you mean by the fine is regressive?
So for, a regressive tax is one that is larger for people that are poor. Progressive taxation system, taxes are raised on the rich, but regressive tax is the opposite, where they're raised on the poor. And a $200 or $500, which is the maximum fine for someone making $20,000 a year, will ruin their life. I mean, if they have to stay in jail for a week to pay off this fine, which is what they would have to do to pay it off, compare that to someone, a millionaire, absolutely nothing. They're exempt from the law, basically. They can speed as much as they want. They can commit all the Class Cs they want. They can assault as many people as they want, grope as many people as they want. But someone that doesn't have as much has basically their entire, income taken from them, weekly income for some people. I want to move to a system where we fund these courts more from the, richer people that are committing these offenses, and not from the poorer people. Although I do still think there should be some kind of consequence, obviously, for committing, an offense.
So what you're saying is that if you and I and Jeff Bezos all speed, we should be fined differently.
Exactly. I mean, this causes major problems. Jeff Bezos, bringing up Jeff Bezos, when he recently renovated his home, he just told everyone coming, don't worry, park anywhere you want, I'll pay all the tickets. So they just park everywhere they want, tens of thousands of like insane amounts of parking tickets for a year, 2 years long. The police were out there every day, but Jeff Bezos just paid them all, and he was just exempt from the law, paid millions of dollars. UPS and FedEx in New York City, they just simply, for them, in their opinion, abiding by the parking laws or finding a place to park would just be detrimental to their business. They'd much rather just pay any fines they receive. So in fact, they just tell drivers, park anywhere you want, disregard any parking laws, and any ticket you get, we'll pay it. And they in fact just made a deal with the city so that city police officers now don't even ticket UPS drivers. The city just collects from UPS every year what they estimate they would get if they were out in force, ticketing them at normal rates. And to me, that's just, you gotta have laws. You can't just exempt big corporations and rich people from laws. They gotta apply to everyone. And the way the system works now, they only apply to those who can't afford the fine. If you can afford the fine, they basically don't apply to you.
Well, aren't you isn't that an overstatement? The laws apply to them. They don't have the same punishment implications, or they don't have the same set of threats. That is, I don't like parking tickets, and if I got 50, I wouldn't, it would really hurt. But I still did the same, Bezos and I both broke the same laws. They're not as much a deterrent to him as it might be to you and I.
Well, I would say, yeah. I would say, if the law, if it's not a deterrent at all, if you can afford it, and you just simply speed as much as you want and don't disregard the law completely because you can, I wouldn't say the law applies. Necessarily, if you just like how it doesn't really apply to. I would say application of the law also covers enforcement. When enforcement is non-existent from the perspective of the person committing these crimes, then I would say it's not really applied.
Now, You had a comparison. Somebody asked that question, did you have a chance to compare Texas to other states? You did do that. How much of the difference is, the old story that they stop you with a radar trap, to make money for the city?
I
Is there
mean,
a
this
difference,
has
and
been,
is that has to do with the way states and counties are funded in different
yes,
states?
certainly. That's actually a major kind of criminal justice initiative, that people want to require cities and counties to not just get revenues in from enforcing the law, but in fact have to pay, to enforce the law, to jail all these people and such. In Texas, I mean, there have been, of course, lots of cities where these speed trap cities caused the legislature one time to pass a law saying that you can't get more than half your municipal budget, maybe 10 or half from speeding tickets. Usually it's like 0.5, 0.1% for a normal city, but it leads to big problems. It's led to big problems before where we're just basically cities exist solely as a result of snatching motorists who, again, as we saw, I mean, if their only goal is to make money, they're probably not as concerned about the facts as much. And as we saw, there's really no way to really fight these. I mean, if you're a normal person, especially if you're, driving, on the interstate, traveling on a road trip. I mean, other states, your question about other states, no other place other than the Nordic model countries follow the day fine system. But other states, at least, do not treat it as a criminal offense. Some states do, but some states treat it more as a civil infraction. And on the one hand, you can't, you don't have rights like a jury trial and all this stuff, but it is considered more of a less serious than just being jailed indefinitely.
I have two other questions. One is, what is the cost of collecting a $200 fine? Do the cities care, or are they coming out ahead? And two, why are you going to law school? Why don't you just go right in law practice?
Thank you. Well, yeah. Unfortunately, one needs a law degree to get into the bar. The law school racket. I kid, of course. But I mean, costs. I do have a little bit here. 32% usually of the amount collected is kind of the average for cities as their expense. But
so it's an 87% profit.
Yes. So well, not 87. I guess 67%.
Seems a little high, but okay. Interesting question.
I mean, it is profit. I mean, in terms of, but I mean, really, when you look at these local governments, though, I mean, these go to fund, I mean, very important things. Local governments are always perpetually strapped for money. So, I mean, they need to be replaced by something. But the question is, should it be from off the backs of everyone that has the misfortune of not being able to just pay someone to take care of it?
Have you looked at the difference in cost to the person having to pay? That is, if you can just write the system a check, it doesn't cost you much more than the fine. If you can't write them a check and you have to go through the process, it costs you way more than the fine.
So you're saying if you fight it, you have to pay more. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Or if you don't know the system and you spend time on it, costs you more than somebody who says, okay, here's your check for $200, right?
Exactly. I mean, courts make it very, very easy to pay, online, by credit card, by, even some courts now, I haven't actually seen this in practice anywhere, but the law does allow courts to authorize police officers to collect the fine from you on the spot. Just pull out the credit card machine, take cash from you. I mean, just on the spot. But to fight it, of course, it's not as easy. And to fight it, of course, more court costs get added on. You have to, of course, all the take off work. These are only during a work day. You have to take a half day, a whole day of work, and not just for the trial. You have to show up for the pre-trial meeting with the prosecutor, which is not supposed to exist in the first place. It's just a way to get you to plead guilty and just move on. The courts are very, very incentivized not to hold any trials or hearings or anything, because these are real expenses for them. They have to pay, staff and everyone, and they have financial incentives like any other organization to just get as many people paying as possible, which results in a guilty conviction on the record. And they're not as concerned with things like, did you really commit this criminal offense, or what are how much can you pay? Because I mean, if they waive fees for all, everyone that can't pay, then they'll just get less money coming in.
Okay, well, keep good work. You've got a fascinating stuff. You all have, this would have some things that one might actually publish at some point.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, our last presenter, Celesia Smith. Professor Dennis Passivoy is thesis advisor. Social entrepreneurship and Texas education, falling short of impact.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. And great presentation, Rylan. I really enjoyed that. Thanks for the chat, too. Like they just said, my name is Celesia, and I'm super excited to present you guys my thesis today. It's entitled Texas Education and Social Entrepreneurship, Falling Short of Impact. Before I actually deep dive into my thesis contents, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit more about myself and why I chose this topic. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, with a mother who's a teacher and a father who's an entrepreneur himself. And so the intersection of education and entrepreneurship has always interested me. But even more so than that, coming to UT from San Antonio and having family in McAllen, Texas, they're pictured down here, I saw for myself the discrepancies in education that I had and my cousins had, especially comparatively to what my peers in the Business Honors Program and Plan II Honors Program have experienced. And that encouraged me to deep dive into education inequity as a whole. And I think it's hard to research equity without wanting to know what the solutions are. And so that led me to social entrepreneurship, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. And I found a family in Cell Fellowship, which is a social impact, social entrepreneurship org on campus. And kind of that intersection has led me to this thesis today, where I've done work to better understand how social entrepreneurship might address education inequities. So to give you guys some context as to where Texas stands, we are the 8th most unequal state in the nation, with 1/5 of Texans earning, or the top 1% of Texans earning about 1/5 of the state's income. And this isn't something that's getting better over time. In fact, it's getting much worse over time. The bottom 5th of individuals in Texas have lost 10% of their wealth, whereas the top 5% have increased its wealth by 96%. And this is a national problem, but it's especially poor in Texas. And this does affect education outcomes at every level, but even before elementary students enter schools, they're already behind if they're low income. Less than half of low income students are prepared for kindergarten when they start. And this is directly correlated to their race, their wealth, their location, segregation in Texas, all of the above. And the thing is, these problems don't exist because no one's addressing them, right? There are ways that Texans can address these issues. There's policy changes, there's funding allocation changes that can be made, because low-income schools are very poorly funded compared to high-income schools. And then also there's social enterprise solutions that can exist. And that is where there's a lot of research that needs to be done. There's tons of research on policy and on funding, and very little about entrepreneurs and how they're responding to this crisis. And that's where my thesis comes into play. I'm asking the question, to what extent is social entrepreneurship an adequate solution to education inequity in Texas? So before I walk through methodology, I think it would be helpful to define social entrepreneurship. This is a very basic definition taken from one of my favorite textbooks. It's the process by which effective, innovative, and sustainable solutions are pioneered to meet social and environmental challenges. I see social enterprise as a spectrum, all the way from nonprofit to kind of an accumulation of for-profit and nonprofit, where they meet in the middle. And that's kind of the different enterprises that I address in my thesis are on that spectrum. So the methodology I use to look at how entrepreneurs are responding and how impactful they are is threefold. First, I did an analysis of how social entrepreneurs and innovators are responding to inequity. What are the innovations they're creating? What are the enterprises that they're putting forth to address these problems? Two, how impactful are these responses, right? What are the outcomes and what are the long-term systemic changes made as a result of these enterprises, and do they track them? And then three, taking the first two in mind, what does this say about social entrepreneurs in Texas, but also what does it say about the students? So let's dive into that first one first. There's lots of ways. The short answer is there's lots of ways that social entrepreneurs are responding to this inequity crisis. And here are just a few. Independent charter schools, examples are like KIPP Public Schools, IDEA Public Schools. Those are big in Texas and in Austin. Plan II actually has a partnership with KIPP. We have EdTech for administration. These are things that teachers use and that it's B2B, so school districts will purchase them to better inform insights and instruction for educational courses to improve outcomes in students, but they approach the teachers to do that. In classroom solutions, these are things like after school programs or even in school curriculum that are pioneered by external enterprises outside of the school. And then fourth is EdTech for students. These are usually AI-powered learning tools that students can use and that social entrepreneurs believe can advance outcomes as well. So these are the four. There's many more, but these are the four that are most prevalent and the four that I've decided to analyze. Big question is, how do you actually analyze these entrepreneurs and these enterprises for impact? And there's two widely recognized ways to conduct an impact analysis in social entrepreneurship, right? The first is a theory of change and logic model analysis that basically looks at the mission of the company and the steps that it takes to enact that mission, and even further, what that mission means for any given student or beneficiary. The other is social return on investment, which is a lot more quantitative, and it provides an analysis of the inputs and the outcomes primarily, looking at, how much does it cost to run this enterprise and what are the, quantified impacts, and then calculating a number from that. Because of the subjectivity of SROI, I decided to use a theory of change and logic model analysis to better understand the impacts of any given enterprise. So I look at everything from inputs, what goes in, the money, the teachers, how do you quantify all of that, to the activities, what the enterprise actually does, outputs, meaning immediate results, right? How many students use this program? How many students are attending classes on a daily basis? Outcomes, what are the short-term impacts? And then impacts is actual impact. What is a systemic change that has been made as a result of this program? And more importantly for me, is the enterprise even recognizing that, or are they even reporting or measuring that? And after doing that for a variety of enterprises, there are quite a few things that we can learn. The main one here is this bottom. Impact requires a mindset shift, right? And that takes into account the two things that I mentioned up here. So reporting is inconsistent amongst enterprises. They don't always calculate or report on impacts and outcomes. Oftentimes it stops at how many students are using our program, which is an output. And because of this, Band-Aid student solutions persist. Consistently, enterprises in the entrepreneurship space are reactionary and not preventative. And that persists in Texas as well, which is why this mindset shift needs to occur. Having a holistic approach to understanding student needs is more important than ever right now. And from what my research tells me, most entrepreneurs aren't really taking that into account. I spoke with a partner at Imaginable Futures, which is a philanthropic investment firm that invests in education and healthcare enterprises that work to basically create that long-term systemic impact. And Ashley said the entire system needs to be overhauled, but realistically, it's not going to happen, right? And so this is a long and hard change that should happen over time. The thing is, it is happening over time, which is great. There's a lot of programs right now that exist. One that I want to point out, this is Dr. Kim. He helped me a lot with my research. He's a professor at Harvard University who teaches a course on social entrepreneurship and education. And he and I, as well as Ashley Buckner and I, talked a lot about that mindset shift that is occurring. And there are many organizations at UT working to address these as well. These university programs have done phenomenal jobs of teaching students how to measure impact and innovate accordingly to more fully address the needs of beneficiaries. One of which is Cell Fellowship, an organization I currently lead at UT. Super proud of them and everything they've done. And they're actually on this list as well of different people who have supported me through this journey because, organizations like this exist so people like me can better understand impact. And without, Dennis Passavoy, my thesis advisor, who's a professor of social entrepreneurship, I probably would not be where I am right now. I also wanted to thank my second reader, Professor Rylan, Cell Fellowship that supported me up to this point, and both my parents. As I said, my father's an entrepreneur, my mom's an educator, and I think the way they raised me has led me to exactly where I am now. And so I hope you guys enjoyed my little spiel. Thank you. I'm open to questions.
So so far, what are the best solutions?
I actually have an example of one outside of Texas that I think is a really great example. The best solutions, I think, are not based on the actual activity done, but more so if they can take that activity and prove long-term results. So I have this example of Harlem Children's Zone. Their theory of change, their mission, so to speak, and the way they think they work is by creating a zone of educational opportunity to break the cycle of poverty through education for communities in Harlem. It's a cradle to college system, and they don't only measure the number of children in classes, but they do long-term longitudinal studies of the impact of their programs. So they look at, which students who graduate from HCZ come back to the community with a higher income? Which students are coming back to mentor? Or which students have graduated college? And their reports have demonstrated that they're not only beating the Harlem average of college attendances, college acceptances, but also the United States average, which is absolutely insane for that community. So I think that's an example of an enterprise doing it significantly better than others. Fun fact, under the Obama administration, they heavily considered scaling this model. But one of the huge problems with a cradle to college methodology like this is that it's just really difficult to monetize. It requires so much money over time. And so that is something that people have always struggled with in the entrepreneurship space when it comes to things like this.
So does it require more money than is being spent now for the public school system?
So that's a great question. And that's one that I wanted to so deeply analyze, but it's just not within the scope of my thesis. I would be super interested to better understand that. I think HCZ, from the articles that I've read, is more expensive than the public school system right now because they do a lot more than just education. They have significant nutrition programs. They have a practitioners institute where they teach other schools how to do what they're doing. They have family support programs as well. So it's well beyond that just, this is a school that we're going to support you with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm just taking the educational component.
Cool.
What did you mean? You used the word reactionary was that about legislators or entrepreneurs?
Entrepreneurs. So I have an example, let's see, for this too. So one of them is Civitas Learning. Civitas Learning is an edtech platform. They're actually here in Austin, and they use data to chart the best course for students, right? They're B2B, so they sell their software to schools, and schools will use their software to basically catch students who are failing before they know they're failing,
Right.
which is great, right? And it is an enterprise that works and that does good. But at the end of the day, it doesn't address the root cause issue of inequity, right? You can support a student and give them extra tutoring and give them, an iPad in the school district, right? But if a student is coming to school starving every day, a hungry brain can't learn. And so there's not enough social enterprises in the education space, from my perspective, that address those root cause issues. So Harlem Children's Zone does a pretty good job of that, though. So they're just not in Texas.
Well, I was under the impression that with the school lunch program and all that, everybody gets fed. Is that not true?
It's not true. And that's just an example, like that's only one meal of the day, right? If a child is like coming to school hungry every day, that's a lot more than what a not that great of a school lunch can provide. Coming from the public school system myself, where the school lunch was not all that.
Well, that's a different, very different issue.
Yeah.
You know, so here's one question. Can you talk about impact measurement and some of the issues with current standards, but also you can add in what are the measures of the problem? What
Yeah.
percent of the kids come to school hungry? And the whole range of issues.
Yeah. Absolutely. So
Not everybody in Harlem needs this program. So who does need the program, or what percent of the people need the program? Or maybe everybody in Harlem does need the program. I don't know.
Okay, I'll answer the impact question first. There's so much ambiguity surrounding impact measurement. The two that I have here are the most widely accepted, and even those, they're wrought with confusion and fickleness, so to speak, right? From the theory of change and logic model perspective, one of the challenges that I ran into was the fact that I only have what the enterprises report, right? I did deep dives into their impact reports. I spoke to some people who worked at these social enterprises and tried to understand why they do what they do and what success is defined as for them. And I even spoke to someone at KIP, and they were so confused. This was the chief strategy officer. She was so confused about what success was and why they measure what they do. And KIP doesn't do a lot of like longitudinal studies. They have a couple, but just a lot of the conversations were really enlightening to me, in that it is just so ambiguous, no matter who you are, no matter what, if you're a C-suite executive, if you're a student at UT, that impact measurement is the piece that's always going to be very subjective. And so that reporting aspect, when I looked at, if they didn't report it, I was like, they don't record it, right? That was my assumption when writing this thesis, that definitely posed problems, because they might not report it, but they might measure it for their own use. And then looking at social return on investment, I think there's a host of issues with SROI as well, especially with the fact that you can plug any numbers you want into this and decide what your SROI is. There's a social enterprise called 1 Acre Fund that actually puts SROI on their website, and they just use one outcome to calculate their entire SROI. It's the change in farmers' income over time over their inputs. And so that is what they determine to be their SROI. But they also have significant data that tracks the quality of life change in these farmers over time. And so they have this whole impact measurement spectrum, but they're not calculating that into their SROI. Should I do a theory of change and logic model analysis on 1 Acre Fund? I think I would find significant impact. But when it comes to SROI, it's just something that is not necessarily like trackable, so to speak. It's not necessary to put in there. So I think those are quite a few issues with that. Also, taking into account negative externalities is something that is not often done in SROI or the logic model. And so that's something you have to like think about internally, and like no enterprise is going to report like, oh yeah, half the students were actually negatively impacted by this. And so that serves to be another problem with impact measurement. The other question.
Okay, here's a question from Michelle Maksoud. Since we don't have unlimited resources, are there any thoughts about how we can use our limited resources to help others the most?
Yeah, I think that from a consumer perspective, I hope I understand the question correctly. I'm thinking of it from like an individual perspective, but also as like a societal perspective. So from an individual perspective, I think it's super important to look at impact reports and look at organizations like long-term goals and measurements when we're supporting any group, right? There are some charter school
Does that
districts.
include public and private, or just private?
Wait, say it again?
The impact is, you're talking about public and private, or just those that are created by social entrepreneurship?
Oh, I'm thinking social entrepreneurs, or like social companies who have social good attached to them, right? From a policy perspective, I think it gets like super difficult, and that's why I did not do my research on that. I'm much more knowledgeable about social enterprise. And so when it comes to social enterprise, I think as an individual, we can deeply understand the impacts of like any individual organization if we like do the work to do that, right? Like looking at reports, looking at like the actual like content that comes out of these programs. That's important. And if you mean like limited resources and like donating, or as in like giving like support to these groups, that's like what I hope I'm like answering the question correctly, or like answering the question the way you expect it to be.
No, no, I don't have an expectation. Let me give you a hypothetical.
Okay.
If this Harlem change zone is so effective, should we take all the money from the public schools and give it to them?
Actually, Buckner would say yes.
Okay.
So I think it depends on your perspective. Like, in my opinion, the public school system, especially in Texas, is absolutely awful. There's so many issues with it. I spoke to people who are working in TEA too, and they also agree. It's just one of the things that you can't just overhaul the entire system in a day or a week, or even probably 5 to 10 years. It takes much longer than that. And like the Obama administration, they tried with HCZ, but it's just so expensive. And so really what entrepreneurs should also do is think about how they can scale on an individual level without financially wrecking themselves. So it's about thinking with an impact first lens, but also keeping in mind like those that you need to be scalable. And one of the things that HCZ is doing is that Practitioners Institute, where they are teaching other school districts and other programs to replicate what they're doing in different cities. So, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. Obviously comments about your great work. And we're 2 minutes over our time. We're supposed to be done at 5:20. So thank you very much. Another brilliant presentation, Celesia. Thank you all for the opportunity to moderate this. This has been fun, learned a lot. Now I don't know if what else I'm supposed to do here. Anything else I'm supposed to do? My co-host, Larissa?
Nope, we're all good. I'm going to be ending the meeting soon. Thank you, Professor Sager.
Okay, well, hopefully this was all what everybody expected, and good luck when you finish your thesis, which I think was what, about a month? Is that right, when they're supposed to be done? Okay, well, y'all are doing very well. Thank you very much.